Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first full day of SIFCon 2020, the virtual science fiction and fantasy convention bringing together creatives and fans to talk about the things we like most about science fiction and fantasy and everything in between. My name is Shalina. For those of you who don't know me, I write as T.S. Valmond, and I put out science fiction, fantasy, YA fantasy, and I'll be moderating the panel this morning for all of us from snowy Edmonton, Alberta. So before we get to our panelists, I want to just remind you, if you weren't here last night for our first live, that the amazing content that's coming today is going to be available to you on Facebook and YouTube. And you can follow us, subscribe, set reminders, anything else you need in order to get the content you want most. But if you have to step away, because sometimes that happens, don't worry, everything's going to be recorded. You can come right back here and pick it up where you left off. And if you are commenting on Facebook, remember they don't want to share your name with YouTube. So when you see the little warning sticker, let StreamYard send your name over to YouTube so we can all get to know each other a little bit better here and in the Discord. So without any more chat, let's get into it. And I will throw to my other distinguished panelists. I'll let you all introduce yourself. Let's start with Amy, who just happens to be to my left.
Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction. So my name is Amy DuBoff. I publish under Ekeke DuBoff. I write primarily space opera, often of a more space fantasy persuasion. My true space fantasy series is the Dark Stars trilogy, and the middle book in that was a nominee for the Andre Norton Award, which is one of the Nebulas back in 2018. I am probably most known for my Catacomb space opera universe, and that's an expanded one. And Shalina is one of the wonderful co-authors in that with her Verity Chronicle series. I am also a USA Today bestseller, and I am excited to be here and talk about all things space fantasy.
Excellent. Thank you, Amy. And Glynn.
You're up.
I'm Glynn Stewart. I write as Glynn Stewart. I come to you from much sunnier Ontario, Canada. Yeah, I know. I have staff in Calgary, so I know exactly what she's going through. I am the author of more books than I can keep track of, and more series than I can keep track of. But the one that's currently relevant, mostly relevant to this discussion, is Starship's Mage, which no longer has my face on the cover. The original cover was actually a photo of me. That one is pretty much classical science fantasy. I like to call it space fantasy. And probably, it's a little bit popular. It's a little bit popular.
Awesome, Glynn. Thank you.
And Cece. Oh, we lost one. We'll wait for Cece to come back.
Man
so
down.
we had a man down. No man left behind. Don't worry.
All
We'll
the
get him in
fun
here.
virtual conventions.
Yep.
It just starts right at the beginning. So I've got a few questions for the panel. And if there's anyone joining us on YouTube, Facebook, please be sure to say hello, tell us where you're from, and drop your questions in the chat. We're going to get to them in just a little bit. Okay. So first off, I just wanted to ask the panelists what they think of when they think of space fantasy. What comes to mind for you? And there's no order. You can just jump in when.
Amy?
I definitely think of things being with the kind of magic-y or a magic type analog in there. So I think you could make the argument that Star Wars falls under that. They tried to sort of retcon it and make it all sci-fi with the midichlorian thing, but well, we all know that it's totally space magic. So so things of that nature that are definitely, you need the space setting. That's a critical component of the space fantasy, but some other mystical or something that can't really be explained through normal natural laws.
It's Star Wars with the serial numbers filed off.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's more complicated than that, but to a certain extent, that's kind of fundamentally you can't ignore the juggernaut in the room of Star Wars, as Amy says, which is the single biggest space fantasy property of the last 50 years. There isn't really anything else that comes close. I mean, there are a bunch of other things. There's Andrew Norton's stuff and Anne McCaffrey's stuff in the 80s and 90s, possibly 70s for Andrew Norton. My timelines are not great on when who was publishing, but they were writing science fiction and just straight up science fiction, except it was stuffed full of psychics, and that those extra psychic powers, psionic powers, whatever we want to call them, were also driving everything. And so, as Amy was saying, you need something that is inexplicable, that's something that both the reader and the characters don't fully understand, and the desire to explore beyond what we know is inextricably interlinked with the human psyche. So is the assumption that beyond what we know contains the scary and the fantastic. So in the explorers of the 1500s, 1200s, 1000 BC, I mean, we see this in Herodotus even, they would go out and they were going into the strange and the unknown, and they were seeing things they didn't understand. They were coming back with these stories of things nobody knew. And they became fantastical, magical. They were strange and wonderful things. The concept of what is beyond what we know is fantastic. And the desire is ingrained to our psyche. And then the concept but also the desire to explore and to tell stories of exploration is also ingrained in our psyche. And it's from that desire to explore that we get science fiction. And as we're pushing out into those areas of the unknown, for us to integrate that old cultural archetype of fantasy is extremely natural, even though in our modern world we very much try to divide the science and the fantastic, and we see in that exploration the progression of our science, but it is still a fantasy when we're talking about space exploration. So leveraging in those fantastic elements works in a way that a lot of people don't think it is when they look at it and go, no, this is science fiction. What are you doing getting wizards in my spaceships? It's all the same thing.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, you could do Lord of the Rings in space pretty easily.
It's called planetary romance, and a bunch of people did.
Yeah, I think an argument could be made that
By the way, can you guys see me? By the way,
yeah, we can.
Yes. So I think an argument could be made that.
Cool. I was having.
The Marvel universe and kind of the space-based superhero stuff sort of falls into that space fantasy, like Captain Marvel and Thor. Those. Definitely. So Charles, why don't we do an intro for you now that you're
it does. Oh yeah. Yeah, my apologies. I was having hardware issues. That's why the delay. My name is Ekeke. I write space opera as well as superhero fiction. Space opera in terms of my Star Brigade series, superhero fiction in terms of my Pantheon Saga series. And I'm happy to be here.
Awesome.
We're happy to have you.
We were just talking about
space fantasy and basically what that looks like in the modern age. And I think that was great coverage there, Glynn. I think we pretty much nailed that one.
Yeah, Glynn hit it out. I love the part where I love the part where you kind of talked about how it's kind of the unknown, because kind of like how you have the hard science fiction where it's just like, okay, this could actually happen, or this is what's going to happen eventually. You have like unknown. I think that was one of the things, like, you know, when you're talking about Star Wars, like the trilogy, like the description of the Force, it was this very mystical, like, behind it really being explained, but it was part of the fabric of everything and infused everyone. But there's certain people who have a talent and can harness it, and that's kind of exactly kind of what Glynn was talking about. It's like when there's something that's unknown, whether it be ground-based or something we see in Earth or something that's in space, to many people, it's indistinguishable from magic. And I think that that's one of the things. And it's a very fertile ground, because, you know, sometimes you have people who they don't want to go too hard in the science fiction, so they can make it a little more fantastical. And that way it's like, that's why you can have, like, you know, superpowers in space, Or you can have like this kind of what you hinted at with the Marvel cosmic beings, the Marvel cosmic heroes and the cosmic beings, how they have this cosmic pantheon where you have these beings that defy physics, defy any type of ground-based logic, and they're just so like eternity. Eternity is essentially the fabric of space. Or you have Galactus that you could say he's a bad guy, but is he really? He's kind of part of the balance of the whole universe, or this universe. And just even the whole concept of a multiverse, that's not something that can be readily explained away. Like how does that even exist? That's very fantastical in many ways. So just something as based as like time travel or space travel, where you're going to different dimensions, like not even just different alternate realities, but different dimensions. Like, what are the physics on this? People might not understand it. Whatever the physics of this new dimension are, completely defy logic. Or even with, you're talking about Norse mythology, kind of like Asgard and whatnot. Asgard is part of 9 realms. You have, the Ice Giants realm. You have the Mustafel, and probably and you have all these different dimensions that completely are like, wow, like what kind of like, and you explore them and you find out more and see what's in common and see what's completely like different in terms of how this reality, whole plane of existence works compared to what we consider normal. And they could say the same about us. And that's always a fascinating thing when you can have that and you put that on paper,
Exactly. Thank you
for that. And also welcome to everyone who's joining us. It looks like we've got some people in the chat. We've got Alabama and Craig coming in, Marcus coming in, Diane's here. We've got some people from Facebook. If you're on Facebook and you want to share your name with YouTube, please give StreamYard permission so we can see who it is chatting with us. We've got Tokyo, Mark from Tokyo here. Awesome. Thanks for joining us.
It's amazing to see people from around the world.
I love that. I love that. And awake. That's so good. So if you have any questions, remember we're going to do questions from the chat a little bit later. So feel free to jump into that. The next question I have on my list is for everyone else on the panel is, how did you happen to come to write space fantasy?
What brought you to the genre?
Someone else want to start with that one since I did last time?
Sure.
I'll go. Sure, go for it. I'll start. So I think for me, I started with space fantasy. Started because I wanted to tell stories, and I initially was more kind of sketch artist, and I was a huge fan of like stuff like, of course, Star Wars. You can tell my explanation earlier, and I loved Babylon 5 because even though Babylon 5 was a little more grounded in reality, a lot of their mythology that they built up over the 5 years, very, very science fantasy based. The first ones, the shadows, those wars between them. It's like, that's not like hard science fiction at all, but it was awesome. It really fit into the show very well because of the good storytelling. And so I think for me, it was just a matter of like, I followed the J.R.R. Tolkien rule, which is I wanted to tell the type of story that I would like to read. Because at the end of the day, it's like, we as readers are fans. And when we're writing our stories, particularly when we're writing that first story, this is our baby. And this is the type of thing like, okay, this is the type of story that I would read as a fan. And when you have that joy and enjoyment behind it, it really comes out in the story. Like, even though I didn't know what the heck I was doing, like I'd never written a story before, but I just knew I had to get this story out and get these elements of other tales that inspired me. So that's what got me into it.
Awesome. And Glynn?
God. I was bored. So I'd written a bunch of novels before I wrote Starship's Mage. And that's kind of just was not, they were out with a traditional agent, the usual spiel. I had hit the concept of episodic indie releases and I needed an idea. And I was reading TV tropes and I bounced across the trope of a wizard did it around the time of poking at all the things around faster than light travel and all the various ways science fiction has moved people between the stars. And my response was literally well, bugger this, a wizard did it. So what does that require? And the backstory and the structure of how that would be became a 5,000 word short story. My partner poked me to do more with it. That 5,000 word short story became a 25,000 word novella. That went up on Amazon. 4 more of those followed. That became this guy. And suddenly I was a full-time author writing space fantasy, and I wasn't quite sure what had happened. But a lot of it boils down to taking the concept of a wizard did it and applying it to everything where we had to hand-wave stuff in science fiction. At least initially. It's not quite so much now, but from the early Starships Mage books are the hardest science fiction I ever wrote. When then there's
You
magic.
were one of the first. You were one of the first ones too, right? To really do space fantasy, right, Glenn?
So, I mean, there's a bunch before me. I have been accused of this before, and I will accept some credit for a resurgence in indie space in the late 2010s.
Okay, fine.
I'm not going to pretend this was my idea at all.
Understood.
And I think Star Wars is the resurgence of Star Wars
yeah.
and the new trilogy are as much responsible for the resurgence of space fantasy as anything else. But I do believe that Starships Mage was one of the first big indie space fantasy novels of this the current resurgence that we're seeing of the genre.
Cool.
Yeah, for me, going to write it, I think was just a natural extension of my love of the space exploration tales and just that idea of being able to go out to other worlds. And as much as I love and appreciate hard science fiction and the work that goes into it, I am not really a scientist at heart, and that level of scientific rigor is not something that I particularly want to incorporate into my book. So it's really just a matter of letting my imagination roam, and what comes out of it is what comes out of it. So with the Cataclysm universe, you could sort of make the argument that, well, you know, it's Clarke's fifth law with all of that, but it's essentially just space fantasy because I'm just making stuff up that, you know, maybe one day they'll prove that it actually matches up with reality. But I just wanted to be able to do what I wanted with the universe and just have a fun time with it, because I think that's really what it comes down to with a lot of the fiction that we consume, and especially in the SF and F genres, just letting your imagination roam free and have an escape into another reality for a while. What about you, Shalina?
I was going to say the same thing.
I basically came into it sort of like Charles. I wanted to see, I wanted to write myself into the stories. I wanted more of me on the page, and I knew I could do it. So I just started writing what I thought was sort of a young adult fantasy, which is actually just aliens on another planet. And eventually they're going to run into the rest of my space fantasy universe. But for now, they're just aliens on a planet. And I thought I'm fascinated by the science. I'm fascinated by the technology. I know the possibilities are endless. So why should my imagination be? So I thought that's kind of what pulled me into the genre and writing that, as opposed to doing something more contemporary or modern, because my mind is always on the future. That's just kind of where I'm at. That's the way I'm designed. I just focus forward. And I was excited to be a part of this kind of growing movement of space fantasy in the genre. And I came in about really late a few years ago, but I said, it's not too late. So here we are.
Never too late.
Never too late to get into this. Now it's like.
Yeah, and to piggyback on what Amy was saying, I looked into science to a point, but I was like, I'm probably going to get raked over the coals if I try and get too into this, and I'm wrong. So all the more reason to go a little more fantastical in certain elements.
Exactly.
That's why if you're writing modern day stuff, it's just a pistol and not a Glock 19, because you will get something wrong about a Glock 19.
Yeah. And I think the biggest thing with any fiction really is just having internal consistency there. So I do think that despite not necessarily having a scientific backing, you still need to have a level of internal consistency with and have just specific rules within your space fantasy universe, and that way the reader can really get immersed in it and know what to expect. And then when you do want to break a rule, that's a really big deal, rather than just throwing out something random.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So,
Go ahead.
Like a Bible for consistency, if you will. Like, just so it's like, it can almost be your own, like when you're going to do in your first pass, if you will, after you finish, it's like, oh, wait, that doesn't quite follow my rules. That's different. unless there's a reason, I should probably not do that.
Excellent.
Excellent. So when
When it
it
comes to the tropes in the genre, let's say science fiction, fantasy tropes, I mean, there's kind of a lot to choose from. Do you have any favorites that you always tend to end up in your series or books?
I'm not calling out
Anyone in
anyone.
particular? I'm just.
I definitely tend to have kind of the chosen one who has some level of special ability above and beyond the average person. But I certainly like to try to keep my characters humble. I think that's a consistency throughout that, regardless of the level of power that they come into it, and they respect their power and want to use it responsibly and recognize the danger that they themselves potentially pose as being someone above and beyond.
I like that. Yeah, to again piggyback off Amy, I agree that even if your character starts leveling up, it's so key to keep them grounded, because I think one of the best ways, like one of the best lessons I learned from writing was before I started actually when I started writing was the show Alias, where there was a grounding influence to Sydney Bristow, the spy, when she was the first 2 seasons. She had this grounding influence in her kind of cover life, if you will. And then after she lost that, the show kind of lost that grounding. So I feel many times, whatever genre you're writing in, particularly speculative fiction, where a character has power, your character starts growing with power, it's so important to, one, keep them humble, or if they get too arrogant, there's a price to pay for that, and just make it like there needs to be a struggle. What are they struggling for? And you can do it in a way without full-on nerfing them, because I think sometimes that's a problem where if your character gets too powerful, like the Superman conundrum, where they have to nerf Superman in order to make him a viable, like a villain, a threat, or they have to do, I love this Star Trek trope, they have to warp effect the person. He's going to get his butt kicked to get the guy over. So it's important to do it in a way that is like, hey, let's do it in a way, let's make sure that it's consistent with the rules of your book. And okay, maybe you give them power, but there's a price, there's a cost to it. But going back to it in the beginning, I think one of the things that people like more than anything is to go on a journey with your character. If the character is too high up here and stays that way, it's very, very hard sometimes to people to relate to them. If they start on that journey, whether it's kind of the Andrew Campbell hero with 1,000 faces, or if it's somebody who's fallen from grace and has to rebuild themselves, people want on that journey with you. They want to go on the journey with that character because that makes them more relatable. That makes them empathize and maybe even put themselves in your story. So that's So that's how I feel about that.
Awesome.
Someone has to learn something or change or grow up. Otherwise, who cares?
Yes.
I think there was actually one of the editors, I don't remember which one, who in the early magazines, I don't remember the name of the editor, but I remember this stuck with me a long time ago. Of the editor, if over the course of the story, no one changed, no one learned anything, and no one learned anything, he just wrote "Who cares" on it and sent it back. And so that's something that has stuck with me and being kind of one of the fundamental things that I build into everything I write, or try to anyway. But I mean, and then as you're saying, like keeping the characters humble. I mean, Starship's Mage is explicitly a power fantasy where the power the main character has solves none of his problems. Like,
I love that.
You have a character who has immense political and personal magical power, and it solves. And these two tools are never the solution to the problem. The solution to the problem, 9 times out of 10, is to get 2 idiots to sit down in a room and make them talk to each other. And everything else is just around getting people to talk to each other, because that's the solution 9 times out of 10. The 10th time you're digging multiple graves. It's just how these things go in the kind of setting that I'm working with.
Yeah.
But you're saying there's a lot of choices with tropes. Obviously, a wizard did it. It's like fundamental to the story that I work with in Starship's Mage. But there's also the things around personal responsibility, duty, sacrifice. These are things that recur again and again in my work about who you are in the dark as well. Like,
Nice.
the first Starship's Mage book, around this end of part 2, the representative of the government works out exactly who Damien Montgomery is, exactly what his gifts are, and goes, I could probably catch him right now, but it will be a lot more interesting to let him run free and see what he does with the power he has. And it's based off of that sequence of seeing what he does on his own that they make the decision to recruit him and make him what he is in the later books. It's like, who are you when you think no one's watching? What is your personal integrity? These are the questions I run my characters into repeatedly with a bulldozer.
Yeah,
I love that. That's great.
For me, it's the common themes in my book are family. I mean, everything about my books is about found family, finding family, standing up for your family, being there for your family. And I love an orphan. I married an orphan. I think they're the best characters to follow. I don't know why. I just do. That and twins. You know, don't throw any twins in there, or else I'm done for. But yeah, I love the family aspect of science fiction, and I've always found that to be something very appealing in the various different universes there are. But that's the one that sticks with me the most.
It's also very grounding too. It's ground for just a lot of stories and damage, and also kind of to Glynn's point, like who you are in the dark, like what would somebody do for family, or just because somebody's family doesn't mean, just because somebody's blood doesn't mean they're family. Like you sometimes define family by just who's there, who's in your corner when the chips are down, as opposed to who's your blood family.
Yep.
The blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the
that.
womb.
And with that in mind, what the kind of tropes you love, let's flip that on its head and go, where is it going wrong? What tropes are you tired of and you would love to see Bird?
Blowing up Earth.
Oh yeah.
I am so sick of science fiction, science fantasy, everything in all of the genres I work with, deciding that they're going to kill off 99% of humanity to give their chosen hero some pathos.
I haven't even done it yet.
Yeah.
Chance. I haven't even gone up yet.
To be fair, I think I have. So.
And that's the thing too. It's funny. In mine, I just kind of decided to destroy Earth, and it's not habitable anymore because there's so many times in tropes where it's just like every single time, like humanity, like Earth is just attacked and they fight back. And here's the thing: there's nothing wrong with that, but I think it's just been done so many times, and I found just I'm just gonna freaking destroy Earth. And you can't go back.
Where the thing of Earth getting destroyed is coming from, and I am just at this point I am more sick of Earth getting destroyed than I am of the hero fantasy of humans saving Earth.
Yeah. I think another thing too.
Asshole main characters. Okay. Those two are the two things I see that drive me up the wall. If your main character has no redeeming features, who cares? Unless the book is about them getting ground into paste and rebuilding themselves as a better person, and it never seems to be, who cares? If your character is an asshole, I don't care. Shoot them on page 3, I'm done.
Yeah. I also, another trope that I have a problem with is the magnetic person, whether they be a woman or a man, the prince or the princess on a pedestal, where they're worshipped and loved and they're not even a character. They're almost just like an object of obsession. Like I think Lana in Small, the TV, will be a good example of that. It's nice when that magnetic person actually is like worthy of that praise and attention. And even though I still need to watch this series, I heard the Queen's Gambit is a good example of that trope, but done well. So it's kind of tiresome when the person's like, oh my goodness, they're this, they're that, they're this, and they just, okay, why is this person interesting? They're just their personalities, they're perfect and they're pretty. That's it. That's not a personality. So,
but that's me.
I was like, that's me. I'm a princess. Amy, what about you?
Mine is on a slightly smaller scale, and this isn't necessarily just limited to science fantasy, but I think it's often found in it just because of the general scope of story that you're looking in, is this romantic subplot where there's just this constant will they, won't they thing, and it's just inventing all of these reasons for people to not be together, even though they're perfect for each other, and it's just dragging out this thing forever. I tend to like having my relationships as a grounding point for people and have that partnership be a source of strength rather than have it be this thing that's just a constant sort of conflict to the point that you're like, why are they even bothering?
I think the only character I had didn't establish a relationship.
Yeah, they seem miserable.
Took 3 books because one of them was demisexual.
My favorite is the slow burn. Like, yes, they should be together, but there's a
vast
million things why. There's a million reasons why they can't be together.
There's a vast difference between a slow burn romance and a back and forth will they or won't they, where you're teasing the audience and yanking it away.
Yeah. And I like the slow burn. I do not like the will they, won't they.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you on that. I think also another interesting kind of piggybacking on that would be interesting. Like will they, won't they? Sometimes it's just like, if that's the whole basis, then it's just like, it's boring, get to the point. What'd be interesting is that, what if you have people who are supposed to be together, but what if you also show why they're not supposed to be together? And it's like, you don't see that enough, where it's just like, oh, it looks like they're going to be together. And then it's just like, it's not like they're just pulled apart because of bad storytelling. It's just like, oh, wait a minute. Maybe they're better off if they just kind of stay, as friends, or maybe not even together at all. So.
Or even a danger to each other.
I love those kinds of stories where it's like, it's dangerous if they get together. Yeah, and
you can definitely do that with the space fantasy setting of there can be all sorts of disastrous things to come out of that. So it's a lot of fun to play with.
Well, it's time to get some
questions in from the chat. So if you have any that you've been holding on to, please type them in. Our moderators are going to forward them to us so we can slip them in here. It looks like we have a couple here. There's one for you, Amy. When you work with A14, I think that's Ion 14.
Yeah.
How do they provide support for the science part of the sci-fi?
That was mostly just working with Mal or MD Cooper. I would just leave placeholder areas, and so I actually have kind of a funny anecdote about that. When I was doing my first draft of it, I just put in placeholders for all of the things. I knew that they needed to interact with each other in a certain way. So it was like the thingies and the components will add up to the better thingy, and so it was just all of these bracketed things. And then I chatted with Mal afterward, and she came up with what those could actually be that would fit within the universe. And then there were a couple other sequences that I just left it open, and then we co-wrote those areas and brainstormed what they should be, so to keep it consistent. But so I mean, as with any story, you can it's really about the characters and the overall plot and journey, so those details can be slotted in. But anything that required universe knowledge, we chatted about.
Yeah, I think we can get some more discussion about working in shared universes in one of the other panels we have going, I believe. Yeah, I don't have the schedule in front of me, but I know we have one coming. It's going to be really exciting.
Yeah, that'll be this afternoon.
Lucky you guys. I go back to work after this.
She brought up Cuddy as a good example. Somebody brought up Nelson Cuddy as a good example of the will they, won't they overdone. Good example.
Oh, okay.
Cool. So another question
for the panel. Let's see, we got another question here. How much research or world building is too much?
Is there such a thing?
Is too much?
Yes. When it interferes with the story. Craft is a craft, world build. I put craft and world building in the same category. The better your craft, the better your world building, the better the story is. But you cannot let your craft or your world building interfere with your story or slow you down. So if you are spending months crafting the perfect world before you write the story, you are wasting your time, because the odds are you're going to end up having to throw out at least some of that when it collides with the story and your characters. You are never going to be able to build the world until you have the story. The story informs the world, and the world informs the story, and the world informs the story, and the characters inform the world. The characters inform the story informs the character. It's an ever circling circle of these three components, and you cannot put one of these on a pedestal above the others. So it is very easy, in my mind, to have too much research or too much world building, because if you start slowing you down.
Yeah.
Yep.
But at the same time, you do need to do the research in the world building, and don't forget what you did.
You do, yeah. I think because piggyback off Glynn now, particularly when you're going into different genres like that, you want to make sure that it's familiar to what readers are used to. But dude, it's its own thing, and back to what he's saying, like sometimes you're gonna you can do all the world building in the world, and it's super fun to world build, but at the end of the day, a lot of that is not even going to get, like, your character might go in a different direction, so it might not even matter. Or you can run into the age-old issue, which I'm guilty of when I first started writing, and maybe guilty of now. You're writing, and then you kind of do the exposition dump. And sometimes, if it doesn't affect your character, if it doesn't affect the story, the reader's not going to care. And that's one of the most key things. Is like, if it doesn't affect your story, it doesn't get, it's nice, it's fun, but if it doesn't affect the story, it doesn't get the direction, why is it here?
I love David Weber, but you do not need an 11-page dissertation on the functioning of the Warshawski sail and hyperdrive in the middle of the chase scene. David's a great writer and a great guy, but I will never no one is ever going to let him live that one down.
Yeah. and I think even going with that is that sometimes it's, even when it comes to world building, even if you've said it, sometimes you give just enough of a reminder, but you don't need to go. It's kind of like, a good example of this is Psylocke in X-Men, when she was, when she was Japanese Psylocke. Every single freaking time they gave us a full dissertation of her psychic knife is the extension of her entire psychic power. I'm like, okay, we get it. So it's just like, just a little bit, you don't need to go full all the time. So yeah.
Okay.
Amy?
Yeah, I just think from a fan perspective, we've all watched or read that book that's like, wow, someone was really proud of themselves and all of this work that they put in there, and that's just the evidence of the, not necessarily over world building, but of the world building and the craft not really syncing up there. There's a way to do it naturally, in a way that everything just flows and it keeps it grounded. And I particularly like works that give the character's perception of that technology and those world elements, rather than just a straight explanation of how they function. But how does someone feel about them? Is it a positive contribution, or do they look at it as some menace to society? So that can be a fun interplay.
Do any of us fully 100% understand how the little thing on top of my monitor is digitizing the information and sending it to everyone else? I don't. And I feed that into a bunch of my books where my characters, they know what the thing does. They don't know how. That's not their expertise. They don't have 6 degrees in astrophysics, which is what you need to understand, and how the icosospatial drive works, or whichever system it is in whichever story I'm writing.
Just make sure it makes enough sense. It makes enough sense. They don't need to.
So long as it makes sense and it's internally consistent, that's all you need most of the time. Don't forget what you said in the past. Make sure what you're making up as you go fits the rules you've established, and make it up as you go.
But I'm gonna agree
with Lisa in the chat, who said that's why editors are golden. You need an editor, folks, especially if you're new. I am one of those people that does not read all of your, world building in your books. I admit it freely. I get very bored with all the description, and I want to get to what's really important and what's happening in the story. So I find as a writer, that's where I'm weakest, is the world building, because I need to describe what everything does, but I don't really want to describe that. I just want to get to the action and tell everybody what's going on. But there is a balance there, and having an editor can certainly help you with that, and that's what I use my editors for.
I love mine.
Yeah, they're awesome. We've got time for maybe one more question. from the chat. Let's see. We've got sort of some new writers with big ideas thinking about getting into space fantasy as a starting point.
What do you think?
It's where I started. The first thing I published. It wasn't the first thing I wrote. We're not going to talk about the first thing I wrote. No one gets to see that.
I think it's a good jumping in point. There's definitely a market for it, and because it is so open in terms of the directions that you can go with it, it's a good creative tool and setting that you can use to work on the craft of the character and the plot, because you don't have to be worried about being scientifically accurate with anything. So I think it's a good jumping in point for new people.
Gives you a lot of freedom to make up your own rules for the setting and how things work.
Yeah, and I agree. I completely agree. It's a great jump. It's a great starting point. I think more importantly, even if you're not, you don't have to be like thoroughly enmeshed and in love with it, but you have to like it to some degree. You have to be interested in it, because regardless,
it's true of any genre.
Yeah, it's true of any genre. It's like you have to have something that you like about it, because that, especially if you're a first-time author, that's going to come off on this page. Like whether it's just with the character stuff, with the bits of world building that you sprinkle proportionally throughout the story, you have to just make sure that there's some passion, or else if you're just doing it to market, a lot of times people are going to see that and it's not going to come out as well as you would liked. So.
Absolutely.
And I think that's one of the
main
main
reasons we're having this panel is just to show people, yes, we do. We love it. We love this genre. That's why we picked it. That's why we're here. That's why we put the books out for the readers, because we keep coming back to these amazing stories. And we have lots within us to tell from the sounds of it, I think.
And it's timeless. It's a really timeless genre. You're not going to be dated by this new scientific discovery that's come up.
No. Yep. That is, unless it's like 400 years from now and it shows up. Maybe it is. No, but you're right. It can be timeless, and that's an amazing thing about it. And it's fun. It's adventurous. It just can immerse you back to what Glynn was saying, where it's like, particularly when you have that right mix of character development, like relatable character, good relationships, fascinating world around them, and it all just merges together. It's like you have such an immersive story. That's one of the reasons why people still come back to the original trilogy so well, because it was so immersive in its own way, and it just drew you in, and you were with Luke through that 3-movie cycle, or just any of these books, like kind of what he was. And I love what Glynn said also about his book, where it's like, yeah, this guy gets powerful, but just because he has powers, I'm like, that doesn't mean he's gonna, Superman the crap out of everything. He still has stuff to deal with. There's still things that even his powers won't solve. And I think that makes it fascinating. That's where the character comes out. Who are they in the dark? What are they going to do to make these things happen? Are they going to lose their integrity? Are they going to lose their morals? Are they going to break their code? Or are they going to stick to it no matter what? It's kind of like what The Winter Soldier. One of the things that made it such a great film is because you have this shifting world around Captain America, and he stood firm. I always call it, in my opinion, it's the best Superman movie that didn't have Superman in it. Because it's like, that's how you do a Superman movie. But it's just like, he had this moral code that many thought was outdated, but he stood in the line and he won the battle without even throwing a punch. He realized the only way to get through and beat this adversary was to not fight back. And so I think that's showing that character coming out in these shifting times in this world that could be morally gray, without the character being an asshole. That's what made
It wasn't a fight that Captain America could win, but it was a fight that Steve Rogers could win.
Yes. Thank you. That's perfect. Yes. I love that. Mic drop.
Absolutely. Well, this has been fantastic panel. I don't want to cut you guys off, but we could keep going and going and going, and this would never stop. And we've got more content all day long. We're going to be coming to you again with another panel on the hour. So just to wrap things up before we go, I want to give everybody a chance to do a little outro. If you've got a book nearby, get ready to hold it up as we get ready to sign off. If you still have more questions, you want to chat some more, we're going to be in the Discord. We're not going anywhere. We're going to be here all day. check us out in the Discord. The conversation can continue. We'll also be on Facebook if you want to join us over there. Okay, so let's get started with the outros. Who'd like to begin? Who's got a book handy?
All right.
Glenn's the only prepared person here.
I'm only prepared because Shalina told me to go grab a book.
You're like ready to go. He's like, yeah.
These are the, if I can actually get them in the camera right, first and currently last books of Starship's Mage, books 1 and book 9. My God, there's 9 of them.
Awesome.
Book 9 launched in August. We also launched a novella in September and a book in my Duchy of Terra series in October. And if you look at my website or Facebook group, we will be dropping a pre-order for the next Peacekeepers of Soul book on Tuesday.
Wow.
And that is where I am at the moment. That will be our 13th monthly release in a row.
Wow.
Fantastic, man. Awesome.
Charles?
Oh, I might have frozen.
Never again.
So for myself, CC Ekeke, my book series, my space fantasy book series is Star Brigade. Currently there's 4 books. There's definitely plan to do more in the future. You'll find Star Brigade Resurgent, and there's also 3 novellas that take place during those 4 books, as well as a short story collection. And you can find it on my Facebook page, CC Ekeke, or you can find me on Amazon, or you can go to my website to find my books, ccekeke.com.
Excellent.
And you can find everything from me at amyduboff.com, or catacol.com will route you to all of the Catacol Universe things. So my co-authored book with Shalina, On the Run, the 3rd book in the Verity Chronicles, which he has.
Yes.
So
half of this panel has written books named Exile. Sorry, 3/4 of this panel has written books named Exile.
Nice.
CC, you got to get on that.
No, clearly. I need to jump on that train. It's amazing.
So that one just came out very recently, and then the 3rd book in the Shadowed Space trilogy, also in the Catacol universe, is coming out on the 13th of this month. I am currently writing the Terran Empire saga, which is the sequel series to the original Catacol, and then there's also several other spinoffs. So you can read all about those on my website. And you can find me on social media at Amy DuBoff, most places.
Sorry, my website is glynstewart.com, and you can find me on
Glenn.
Amazon.
Thank you, Glenn.
Put that in
If
there.
you can spell my first name, I find that that's usually actually enough to find me on Amazon.
He's not hiding, people. He's just letting you know he's not hiding.
He's not hiding.
Again, I am Shalina, and I go by T.S. Valmond on my books. I wrote one with Amy. It's amazing. We got 3 books out. The last one just dropped. I have a novella available on my website. If you sign up, it's free to you to read. It's the Starship Hope prequel, and my website is tsvalmond.com. So thank you all for joining us. Stay around. There's going to be a lot more to come, and we hope to see you some more today.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.